When I was only 13 years old, I discovered a terrible fundamental truth about the world. Sometimes the people who are supposed to be your protectors, the ones who should shield you from harm, become the very source of your deepest pain. They become the enemies you cannot escape, the monsters that live not under your bed, but in the room next door. The story I'm going to tell you today is my story. It is a tale of profound sadness, of a darkness that threatened to consume me. But it is, even more so, a story of overcoming. It is the testament of a spirit that refused to be broken. Hello, my dears. My name is Louise Miller, but everyone who knows me now calls me Grandma Lou. I'm 73 years old, born in the quiet suburb of Riverdale, just outside Philadelphia, in the spring of 1952. For most of my life, I've carried the weight of my past in silence, a heavy, secret burden locked away in the deepest chambers of my heart. But time, and the perspective it grants, has a way of changing things. Today, I feel a need to share, to finally unburden my soul of a story I've never even told my own children. So if you're watching me now, please leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support, your kindness, it gives an old woman like me the courage to talk about things that, even after 6 decades, can still ache with a sharpness that feels as fresh as yesterday. Well, my story begins in 1965. I was 13 years old, standing on the precarious bridge between childhood and adolescence. Our world was a simple one. We were a working-class family living in a small 3-bedroom house on Maple Street in Riverdale. The house was always filled with the scent of my mother's starch and the faint, lingering smell of diesel fuel from my father's work clothes. My father, George, was a truck driver, a large man with hands roughened by labor, but a heart impossibly soft for his little girl. He worked for a regional company, making deliveries throughout Pennsylvania and sometimes beyond. His absences were a constant rhythm of our lives. He was gone for days, sometimes entire weeks. The rumble of his engine pulling away from the curb, a sound that marked the beginning of a countdown until his return. My mother, Connie, was a seamstress. She took in washing and ironing from the wealthier ladies in town, her skilled hands transforming rumpled fabrics into crisp, perfect garments. Our small backyard was a perpetual forest of clotheslines, sheets and dresses and tablecloths swaying like ghosts in the wind, a testament to her endless work. I was the 4th child and the only girl after 3 boys. Anthony was the oldest at 19, already carrying himself with a swagger that hinted at the man he was becoming. Joseph was 17, quieter, more observant, with a calculating stillness that could be unnerving. Robert was 15, just 2 years my senior, and had been my closest companion in early childhood before the tides of adolescence pulled him away. In my father's eyes, having a daughter after 3 rough-and-tumble boys was a blessing straight from God. He called me his little princess, his miracle. He kept hard candies, peppermints and butterscotch in the breast pocket of his work shirt, a special treat just for me when he returned from his trips. He carried me in his arms long after I was too big for it, until I was nearly 11, my legs dangling awkwardly, but I never protested. In those moments, wrapped in his strong, safe embrace, I felt like the most cherished, protected person in the entire world. But as the years passed, my father's presence at home became less and less frequent. The trips grew longer, the deliveries more distant. The economy was shifting, and he took every job he could to support us. Sometimes he'd be on the road for 20 days at a stretch. The house felt different when he was gone, larger, emptier, and somehow less safe. And it was during one of these prolonged absences, in the unassuming month of March 1965, that the foundation of my world cracked and crumbled. The Pennsylvania autumn was clinging on, the air still holding a surprising warmth. My mother had a large order to deliver to a client across town. "Louise, I'll be back in a few hours," she said, pulling on her light coat. "Take care of the house. Your brothers are here if you need anything." She said it so casually, with such inherent trust in the natural order of things. A mother trusting her sons to look after her daughter. It was a trust that was about to be violated in the most profound way. I was at the kitchen sink, my hands submerged in the soapy, lukewarm water, washing the lunch dishes. The radio was playing softly in the background, a pop song that should have marked an ordinary afternoon. I felt a presence behind me, a shift in the air before I heard a footstep. It was Anthony. He came close, too close, invading the space that was mine. The hair on my arms stood up. "Louise," he said, and his voice was different. It was lower, laced with an unfamiliar and threatening intimacy. "You're becoming a young lady, you know, filling out." A cold dread, pure and instinctual, shot through me. I tried to sidestep, to put the kitchen counter between us, but he moved with a swiftness that startled me, his hand closing around my upper arm. His grip was firm, unyielding. "What are you doing, Tony?" I asked, my voice a frightened squeak. "Let me go. I'm finishing the dishes." That's when Joseph entered the kitchen. For a fleeting second, a foolish hope sparked in my chest. Joseph would see this was wrong. He would tell Anthony to stop, to leave me alone, but the smile that played on Joseph's lips was not one of protection. It was a smile of complicity, cold and knowing. They had planned this. The realization hit me like a physical blow, sucking the air from my lungs. This was not a spontaneous moment. It was a coordinated action. As if on cue, Robert appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. His face was a complex canvas of emotions. There was a flicker of unease, but it was overshadowed by a desire to belong, to be part of whatever his older brothers were doing. The look in his eyes was one I had never seen before, and it terrified me. "Mom won't be back until tonight," Joseph said, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. "Nobody will know." Those 3 words, "nobody will know," echoed in the small kitchen, becoming a sentence, a life imprisonment. What happened in that room over the next hour is something my mind has spent a lifetime trying to compartmentalize. They were my brothers, the boys I had built blanket forts with, shared secrets with, looked up to. But in that afternoon light, they were transformed. They were my executioners. The 3 of them acted in a horrifying unison, treating me not as a sister, not as a person, but as an object, a thing for their exploration and domination. It was a brutal, shattering violation of trust, of body, and of spirit. When it was over, they left me there, a broken doll on the cold linoleum floor. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, unable to move, the tears streaming down my face and pooling beneath my cheek. The world had become a hostile, terrifying place in the span of an hour. When I finally found the strength to push myself up, my body aching in ways I didn't understand, I stumbled to the bathroom. I locked the door and turned on the shower, scrubbing my skin raw with a washcloth until it was red and stinging, as if I could somehow scour away the memory, the filth, the profound sense of shame that had already begun to root inside me. By the time my mother returned, I had pulled myself together into a crude imitation of normality. Pretending that everything was fine was the hardest performance of my life. "Is everything okay, Louise?" she asked, her brow furrowed as she noticed my puffy, red-rimmed eyes. "You look pale." "Yes, Mom," I managed, my voice sounding thin and far away. "Just a little headache." That night, I pushed my heavy wooden dresser in front of my bedroom door, creating a barricade against the monsters I now knew lived in my own home. But it was a futile gesture, a child's attempt at security in a world that had proven itself unsafe. The next morning, when my mother left for the Saturday market, they came for me again. Anthony didn't even bother to try the knob. He simply threw his weight against the door, and the dresser screeched across the floor, yielding easily to his superior strength. "No use locking yourself in, silly," he said, his figure silhouetted in the doorway, with Joseph and Robert behind him. "This house is ours, too." And so began my personal hell, a relentless cycle of abuse that stretched over the following months. Every time my mother left the house, every prolonged absence of my father became a sentence I was forced to serve. They were meticulous, calculating. They knew my mother's routines better than she did. They knew that on Tuesdays and Thursdays she would deliver clothes and then linger, chatting with the neighbors for at least an hour. They knew that Saturday market trips took a minimum of 2 hours. They were masters of opportunity, and I was their trapped prey. I began to change, the light inside me dimming with each passing day. The cheerful, talkative girl I had been retreated, and in her place emerged a shadow. I stopped eating, my appetite replaced by a constant churning nausea. I lost weight, my clothes hanging loosely on my frame. Dark purple smudges settled permanently under my eyes. At school, my grades, once a source of pride, began a steady, alarming decline. I, who had always been diligent and attentive, now found myself staring blankly at the blackboard, the teacher's voice a distant hum as I relived the latest horror. "Louise, what's happening to you?" My teacher, Mrs. Gable, asked one day after class, her voice filled with genuine concern. "You've always been such a good student. Is everything all right at home?" I looked into her kind, worried face, and the truth bubbled up in my throat, a desperate plea for help. But Robert's words from that first day echoed like a curse in my mind. "If you tell anyone, nobody will believe you. They'll say you're a liar, that you wanted it." The words were a poison, seeping into my own perception. Had I done something to invite this? Had I smiled too much? Worn the wrong clothes? The guilt and shame became my constant companions, torturing me with unanswerable questions. At home, I embarked on a campaign of erasure. I started wearing my father's old flannel shirts and baggy, shapeless trousers, trying to hide my developing body to make myself invisible. I took a pair of sewing shears to my long hair, hacking it off into an ugly, uneven bob. I stopped smiling, stopped speaking unless spoken to. I did everything I could think of to not draw their attention, but nothing worked. My very existence seemed to be a provocation. Things only escalated, becoming more frequent and more violent. One day, after a particularly brutal episode involving all three of them, Joseph held my arms pinned while Anthony leaned in close, his face inches from mine. "If you try to tell Dad when he gets back," he hissed, his breath hot on my face, "we'll say you came on to us, that you've been flirting with all the boys at school too, that you're no good. Who do you think he'll believe? His 3 sons, or the girl who's been acting so strange?" Their manipulation was a masterclass in psychological torture. They systematically destroyed my credibility, preemptively crafting a narrative that painted me as the instigator, the troubled, promiscuous girl. They began planting seeds of doubt in my mother's mind. "Louise is getting a bit flirty, Mom," Anthony would say casually over dinner. The other day, I saw her chatting with that older boy who already works at the garage. She was leaning in real close. My mother would turn her worried gaze to me. "Is that true, girl?" "No, Mom, I swear it's not," I'd protest, my voice trembling. "She's lying," Joseph would chime in smoothly. "We both saw it. You need to keep a closer eye on her." Gradually, insidiously, they eroded the relationship between my mother and me. She began to watch me with a new, suspicious eye, but it was the wrong kind of attention. She was watching to see if I was behaving inappropriately, not to see the terror that was screaming behind my eyes. The only beacon of hope in this unending nightmare was the thought of my father's return. When he was home, they didn't dare come near me. He was my shield, my protector. If he only knew, I would think, over and over. But how could I tell him? How could I break his heart and risk him not believing me? The threat of their lies felt more powerful than my truth. As the months wore on, my body began to rebel against the sustained trauma. I started having bleeding outside of my menstrual cycle, sharp, stabbing pains in my abdomen that would double me over, and fevers that came and went without explanation. I was a ship taking on water, slowly sinking. One night, after a violent assault, it all became too much. I started bleeding heavily, a terrifying, relentless flow that was far beyond anything I had experienced before. A pain, white-hot and searing, ripped through my lower body, and the world dissolved into blackness. I woke up on the cold bathroom floor, surrounded by crimson pools, too weak even to call out for help. It was Robert who found me. I saw the genuine, unvarnished panic in his eyes. "Joseph! Anthony! Come here!" he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "I think this time we went too far." They carried me to my bed, their movements frantic. I was only semi-conscious, but I heard their panicked whispers as they cleaned the bathroom, trying to erase the evidence. "If anyone finds out, we're done for," Anthony muttered, his voice tight with fear. "We'll say she fell down the back stairs, hit her stomach on the railing." They left me in my room, still bleeding, though less profusely. The pain was a living entity, gnawing at my insides. I didn't have the strength to cry anymore. I just lay there, praying to a God I was starting to doubt, asking him to take me away from this pain, from this life, in any way he saw fit. And then, a miracle. A miracle I thank God for to this day. My father came home early. He was supposed to return the following afternoon, but he'd managed to finish his route ahead of schedule. I remember the sound of his truck rumbling to a stop outside, the heavy tread of his boots on the porch steps. He came into my room in the dark, as he always did upon returning, to give me a goodnight kiss. I remember the click of the light switch, his sharp intake of breath. "Louise, princess, wake up," he said, his voice gentle at first. He shook my shoulder gently, and his hand brushed against the sheet, coming away wet and dark. My God, Connie, come here right now. I forced my eyes open. The world was blurry, but I could see my father, my hero, his face a mask of pure terror and anguish. I tried to form a smile, to tell him I was happy he was home, but all that came out was a broken whisper. "Dad, help me." It was the last thing I said before the darkness claimed me again. The chaos that followed is a blur of fragmented memories. The desperation in my father's voice, my mother's screams, the frantic rush to St. Helena Hospital. But I remember with perfect, chilling clarity the looks on my brothers' faces as my father carried my limp body out of the house. It wasn't concern for me I saw there. It was sheer, unadulterated terror for themselves. They knew the carefully constructed dam was about to break. I arrived at the hospital nearly lifeless, my blood pressure dangerously low. I drifted in and out of consciousness, hearing the doctors' voices as if from the end of a long tunnel. But one phrase cut through the fog and was seared into my memory forever. "This girl is a victim of continued and violent sexual abuse. We need to call the police immediately." The emergency room erupted. My father, always the calmest of men, shattered. A guttural roar tore from his throat, and he began throwing anything he could get his hands on, a chair, a tray of instruments. It took 3 orderlies to restrain him. "Who did this to my daughter?" he screamed, his voice raw with a pain I had never heard before. "Ho!" My mother was crumpled in a corner, sobbing uncontrollably, rocking back and forth like a lost child, completely unable to process the horror being revealed. While the medical team worked to stabilize me, a social worker entered the room. She was a young woman named Margaret, with kind eyes and a calm, steady voice. She took my hand. "Louise, my name is Margaret. I'm here to help you. Can you tell me who did this to you?" I looked at my father, his massive frame shaking with sobs as the orderlies held him back. I looked at my mother, utterly broken. How could I be the one to destroy them completely? The lie came to my lips, a desperate, cowardly act of preservation for a family that was already fractured beyond repair. "It was a group of guys," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "On my way home from school. I don't know them. They were from out of town." It was my first lie to protect them, the first of many I would tell in the coming days. Lies that would fester inside me, corrosive and poisonous. I spent a week in the hospital. I needed emergency surgery to repair the extensive internal trauma. The doctor took my parents aside and delivered another devastating blow. The damage was so severe that I had almost lost my uterus at 13 years old. I might never be able to have children. During that week, my brothers did not visit. My parents took turns by my bedside, my father holding my hand as I slept, my mother trying to feed me broth. The police came several times, and I repeated my vague, fabricated story. I couldn't describe the attackers. I didn't know where they were from. The officers exchanged looks. They knew I was hiding something. "Louise, you have to help us," a gray-haired detective said gently. "If you don't tell us the truth, these men could do this to other girls." His words tormented me. The thought of my brothers victimizing someone else was a fresh horror. But the fear of destroying my family, of making my father lose not just his daughter but his 3 sons as well, was even greater. The night before I was discharged, I had an unexpected, terrifying visitor. My mother had gone home to shower, and my father had stepped out to the cafeteria. The door creaked open slowly, and Robert slipped inside. He looked awful, thin, pale, with deep shadows under his eyes. He seemed to have aged years in a single week. "Louise, please," he whispered, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I just came to say, I'm so sorry, really sorry." I stared at him, silent, my body rigid with fear. Anthony and Joseph said if I didn't participate, they'd beat me up, said I wasn't a real man. I didn't want to. I swear I didn't want to. "Go away," I managed to choke out, "before Dad comes back." "He's suspicious of us, you know," Robert said, his voice trembling. "He's been asking the neighbors if they saw anything strange that day. Anthony is in a panic." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. You didn't say anything, did you? Go away, I repeated more firmly this time. I don't want to hear your threats. It's not a threat, he said, moving toward the door. It's just, you know how Dad is. If he finds out, he'll kill us. Literally. And with that, he was gone. I stared at the closed door, tears streaming down my face, because the worst part was, I knew he was right. I returned home on a Sunday afternoon. My father had transformed my room, a fresh coat of pale yellow paint, a new bedspread, everything cleaned and scrubbed. So you feel like you're in a new place, he explained, his eyes heavy with sorrow. A fresh start. He had also installed a new, heavy-duty lock on my door and solemnly handed me the key. No one enters here without your permission. No one. The first days back were surreal. My brothers became ghosts in our own home, leaving early and returning late, avoiding me and my father. My mother tried to act normally, making my favorite foods, fussing over me, but a chasm had opened between us, one I didn't know if could ever be bridged. My father extended his leave from work, vowing not to go back on the road until I was healed and the perpetrators were caught. He spent his days at the police station, growing increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress. At night, he would sit on the edge of my bed and hold my hand until I fell asleep. Nothing bad will happen to you again, princess, he promised. Never again. But the harm was done, and it was living and breathing under our own roof. The nightmares started almost immediately, vivid, screaming horrors where I relived every moment of the abuse. I would wake up drenched in cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. My father would come running, holding me, rocking me, trying to calm the tremors that racked my body. At school, the rumors had spread like wildfire. Small towns have big ears and even bigger mouths. That's the girl who was attacked, they'd whisper as I walked the halls. I became a pariah, an object of pity or morbid curiosity. My friends didn't know how to act around me, and I began to isolate myself completely, spending every break alone under a large oak tree in the schoolyard. The tension at home was a palpable, suffocating presence. My father's suspicion of my brothers grew with each passing day. One night, about 3 months after the hospital, I heard a violent argument through my parents' bedroom wall. There's something wrong with this story, Connie, my father shouted. Can't you see it? Those boys are acting stranger than strange. What are you insinuating, George? For God's sake, they're your sons. And she is my daughter. Look at her, Connie. Look at what they did to our girl. She doesn't sleep. She doesn't eat. Those eyes, those aren't a child's eyes anymore. That was the fault of those thugs, those nobodies that nobody saw in a town where everybody knows everybody. Robert nearly fainted when I asked him where he was that afternoon. Joseph can't look me in the face. And Anthony, he's aggressive, defensive all the time. It doesn't add up, Connie. You're delirious. It's the tiredness, the worry. I'm going to find out the truth, my father stated with a terrifying finality, one way or another. I closed my door and cried silently. The storm was coming, and I was standing directly in its path. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in June, nearly 4 months after my hospitalization. My father had gone to the hospital to pick up copies of my medical records to send to a specialist. I was in the living room trying to study when Anthony sat down next to me on the sofa. I froze. We need to talk, Louise, he said in that fake, concerned voice. This situation can't go on. Dad is getting too suspicious. He grabbed my arm when I tried to get up. If you tell the truth, Dad will kill us. Do you want that on your conscience? You didn't think about my life when you did what you did, I spat back, a sudden fierce courage rising in me. Why should I think about yours now? His face contorted with anger, and he stood, looming over me. You're going to keep your mouth shut, or I swear. The living room door flew open, crashing against the wall. My father stood there, his face a ghastly white, clutching a folder of papers. Get away from my daughter, he said, his voice low and deadly. He threw the folder on the table, scattering the documents. I just came from the hospital, he said, picking up one of the papers. Do you know what this says, Anthony? The doctor documented your sister's injuries in detail, and he wrote that these injuries are consistent with repeated abuse over a long period. It wasn't one attack, it was months. He turned his devastated gaze to me. Why did you lie, daughter? Why did you protect the ones who did this to you? I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The months of fear had stolen my voice. Dad, she's confused, Anthony tried, desperation in his eyes. The doctor said trauma can... Shut up! My father roared, finally unleashing the fury he had been containing. I heard the end of your conversation. You're going to keep your mouth shut. What does she need to keep secret, Anthony? What? At that moment, Joseph walked in from the kitchen and froze, instantly understanding the scene before him. Good, you're here, my father said, a horrible, cold smile on his face. Go get your mother and find Robert. I want everyone in this room in 5 minutes. When my family was assembled, my mother's face already streaked with tears of dread, my father turned to me. Louise, I need you to be brave now. I need the truth, the whole truth. I looked at Anthony's hate-filled glare, at Joseph's terrified pallor, at Robert, who looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. It was them, Dad, I whispered, the words finally breaking free. It was my brothers. The confession unleashed hell in our living room. My father, a man of immense physical strength, became a force of pure, unadulterated rage. He lunged at Anthony, his fists connecting with a sickening crunch. The room descended into chaos. My father's roars, my mother's screams, the sound of breaking furniture. Neighbors, alerted by the commotion, called the police. When they arrived, they had to physically pull my father off my brothers. It was I who, with a shocking, detached clarity, told the police everything. I recounted every detail, every threat, every moment of the months-long horror. As I spoke, I watched the officers handcuff Anthony and Joseph. Robert, weeping openly, confessed his part and was also taken into custody. As they led him away, he looked at me. I'm sorry, Louise, he whispered. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm sorry. I had no forgiveness to give him. There was only a vast, hollow emptiness where my family had once been. In the weeks that followed, our name became synonymous with scandal in Riverdale. The trial was swift. Anthony and Joseph were sentenced to 12 years in prison. Robert, as a minor who confessed, was sent to a juvenile reformatory for 6 years. My father was never the same. The gentle giant was gone, replaced by a hollow man consumed by guilt. I should have known, he would murmur over and over. I should have been here. My mother fell into a deep depression, her hair turning white within months. Our house became a tomb, my brothers' bedrooms sealed shut, their names never spoken aloud. I couldn't bear the whispers and stares at school. Let's leave this place, my father said one night. There's nothing for us here but bad memories. In August 1966, we left Riverdale behind. My father got a transfer, and we moved to New Hope, a historic town nearly 250 miles away. We started over in a small apartment, trying to outrun our past. But I soon learned that the deepest wounds are carried on the inside, and no amount of distance can make them disappear. The first years in New Hope were a struggle. The nightmares persisted. I built walls around myself at my new school, keeping everyone at a distance. My parents were like ghosts going through the motions of life. Then, the letters started arriving. First from Robert, full of remorse. Then from Anthony, bitter and unrepentant. Then from Joseph, which I threw into the fire unread. Robert's words planted a seed, not of forgiveness, but of a slow, painful acknowledgement of what had happened. Time, as it inevitably does, began its work. I graduated high school and was accepted to the College of Education in Philadelphia. Moving to the city was terrifying, but it was also my first real act of reclaiming my life. In college, I slowly began to open up. I made a friend, Martha, who offered companionship without prying. And I met John. John was studying engineering. He was calm, patient, and kind. He saw the walls I had built and never tried to tear them down, only to show me that it was safe to open a door. He respected my boundaries in a way I had never experienced. I won't do anything you don't want, he told me on our first date, and he never broke that promise. His love was a healing balm on my wounded spirit. It was with John that I finally found the courage to share my entire story. He listened, he held me, and he loved me through the pain. His acceptance was a profound turning point in my healing. We married in 1975. Intimacy was a challenge, a battlefield of traumatic memories, but John's infinite patience and love helped me reclaim that part of myself. In 1977, a miracle occurred. Our daughter Mary was born. The doctors had said I might never have children, but here she was, perfect and whole Holding her, I made a vow to protect her, to give her the childhood I was robbed of. Peter followed in 1980 and Anna in 1983. Being a mother healed me in ways I never thought possible. It showed me that I could create a home filled with safety, love, and trust, the very antithesis of my own adolescence. Life moved forward. My brothers were released from prison. Anthony died years later in a fight. Joseph disappeared out west. Robert, however, continued to write sporadically, letters of remorse and updates on his life. He had married, had children, and was doing volunteer work. The anger I held for him slowly softened into a distant sadness. In 2010, a grandmother several times over, I made a decision. I wrote to Robert and asked to meet. It wasn't for reconciliation, but for closure, for me. We met at a cafe in Philadelphia. He was an old man, bearing little resemblance to the terrified boy from my past. We talked for 2 hours about our lives, our regrets. "I never stopped being sorry, Louise," he said, his eyes downcast. "Not a single day." "I know," I replied, surprised to find no anger left, only a quiet peace. "And I hope you never do." As we parted, he asked, "Were you able to be happy, Louise, despite everything?" I thought of John, of our children and grandchildren, of the life we had built together, a life of love, purpose, and profound joy. "Yes," I answered, and it was the truest word I had ever spoken. Very happy. That was my greatest victory. Not to have escaped the pain, but to have refused to let it define me. To have chosen love over fear, life over despair. My dear ones, thank you for listening to an old woman's story. If I share this now, after a lifetime of silence, it is because I want you to know that no matter how dark the valley, dawn will come. Healing is possible. A beautiful, joyful life is possible after trauma. You are stronger than you know. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Grandparents' Tales, and hit that notification bell. A loving kiss from Grandma Lou, and I'll see you in the next story.